viewers. Welcome once again to the People's National Congress Reform Press Conference for April 12th, 2022. As is customary, today our statement will be read in two parts, but before I do that, let me introduce our panel for today. With me from my right is Honorable Mr. Jermaine Figueroa, MP, and to his right, Ms. Amanda Walter-Nazir, MP. They'll be our panelists today, and the statement will be read in two parts. We will start with Ms. Amanda.
Ladies and gentlemen of the media, good morning. We wish to bring recent developments to your attention as it relates to the amendments to the registration of births and deaths. The recent amendments to the Registration of Births and Deaths Act are a ploy to pad the voters list with migrants and other ineligibles. You will recall that in August 2021, the PPPC administration brought to the National Assembly the Registration of Births and Deaths Amendment Bill, which they used their one-seat majority to pass into law as Act Number 9 of 2021. Particularly, this act introduced into our law a seemingly harmless provision, which the PPPC government said was intended to simplify the requirements for obtaining a Guyana birth certificate. We warned then of the sinister motive behind this provision, and less than 1 year later, we see that the PPPC has put into motion their plan to register persons who are without a true and legitimate basis for such registration. This is clearly an effort aimed at padding the voters list, since any person once armed with a Guyana birth certificate and over 14 years of age now becomes entitled to be entered on the National Register of Registrants, from which the voters list is extracted. Section 44A, one of the new sections inserted into the law, outlines the process by which an adult who has no documentation whatsoever may acquire a Guyana birth certificate on the basis of one of the following alone. 1, a declaration in a prescribed form signed by a person of high standing in the community, including a community leader or a toshal. 2, a declaration under the Statutory Declarations Act by a person of high standing in the community, including a community leader or a toshal. This declaration is to be signed by a justice of the peace or a commissioner of oaths, and the declaration must state the particulars of the birth of the person. Or 3, any other document with information, including a certificate of baptism or information in the marriage registers. Effectively, the law provides a means for any person to be registered as a born Guyanese without the need to provide cogent evidence that they were indeed born in Guyana. Compare this slackness with the much more stringent requirements in other countries. In Trinidad, for example, a person seeking a birth certificate is required to provide documentary proof, such as a letter from the hospital where they were born, if they were born at the hospital, an immunization card, the names of their siblings, or a record from the school which they attended. All documents that a genuine applicant already has or can readily obtain access to. We cautioned then that this was a plan to covertly effect tens of thousands of birth registrations, particularly in those far-flung hinterland regions, using an established network of PPPC-aligned justices of the peace, toshals, and notaries public. This danger is compounded by the fact that the Guyana Elections Commission, GECOM, is engaged in office-based registration and not house-to-house registration, which means that any person in possession of a Guyana birth certificate who is aged 14 years and above can present themselves to the relevant GCOM office and must be entered on the National Register of Registrants. The nefarious intent of this legislation is further underscored when one considers the fact that it was the PPPC administration that expressed its concern about the corrupt dealings of justices of the peace and notaries public. It is to be recalled that in the National Assembly on January 24th of this year, 2022, whilst making his contribution to the debate on the Powers of Attorney Amendment Bill, the Attorney General Anil Nandlal said, and I quote, "Unfortunately, in many cases, those who prepare the legal instruments, such as powers of attorney, are either complicit in the fraud or are negligently executing their statutory function. And that contributes significantly to the creation of fraudulent and illegal instruments. A power of attorney by law must be executed before a notary public or a magistrate. One would think that a person holding such a high office would not be particeps criminis, or one who takes part in a crime, or would exercise his functions with circumspection and care." He went on to say that clearly this does not happen. It is therefore the highest level of hypocrisy for the government to have entrusted these same officials, some of whom they deemed corrupt when it suited their purposes, with the power to essentially confer the status of a citizen of Guyana upon an individual. Guyanese must be aware that the registration of births and deaths is a critical component of our national security. The adding of persons to a register who are not legitimately entitled to be there undermines the integrity of the population and can lead to anomalies in the allocation of resources and voting and representation. It can also facilitate the placement of fifth columnists and operatives into key government, military, and leadership positions, both at the local and national levels. And the soft invasion of the country by the addition of foreign nationals to achieve a desired outcome of one group, or the possible annexation by another country through the control of key regions in our country, similar to what played out before our very eyes recently in the Russia-Ukraine conflict. You will recall, Russia cited the protection of the lives of Russian citizens in the Donbass as justification for military action against Ukraine. Now, our party wishes to reiterate that despite these deep concerns, we remain committed to the comfortable settlement of economic migrants in our homeland, as demonstrations of our typical Guyanese hospitality and our full compliance with those international humanitarian obligations to refugees. Nevertheless, because of the incompetence of the PPPC administration, the situation is exacerbated and the dangers heightened by the facts of our extremely porous borders, our lax system of immigration and border control, and the inability of this government to determine who is crossing our borders out of real economic necessity. We continue to maintain that this law in its current format is inimical to the interests of Guyana and the Guyanese people. The time is long past for a national conversation on migration, on the treatment of migrants and the path to Guyanese citizenship. Unless decisive action is taken, Guyanese will find themselves relegated to second-class citizens in their own country. At best, we maintain, the amendment is intended to facilitate electoral manipulation. At worst, it will create the conditions propitious for the eventual takeover of our country by those who have for decades maintained claims against our territory. It ought to be clear to all by now that the PPPC government is bent on maintaining political power through domination and control, even if it means sacrificing Guyana's interests, including our national security interests, for their own selfish gain.
Thank you. Next part of the statement will be read by MP Fidel.
Good morning, members of the media. The PPPC's arrogance and obsession for domination are dangers to stability and democracy. The evidence is increasingly mounting that the PPPC is hell-bent on a course of action that can only lead to political instability and to the erosion of democracy in our country. As predicted by many when the PPPC was installed in office in August 2020, its ingrained tendencies of autocracy, self-centeredness, arrogance, and recklessness have taken deeper roots. Matters have now reached the point where the rule of law, political inclusivity, racial harmony, and moral decay face daily battering at the hands of the PPPC. In describing the current crisis in governance, the PNCR is not propagandizing or engaging in hyperbole. The evidence speaks for itself. The nation is seeing and feeling the full destructive fallout. Let us highlight a few examples of the PPPC's action of which we speak. One, the imposition of IMC on the Linden Utility Services Co-op Society Limited. This is clearly an attempt by the PPPC to put in place a management committee it can control so that it can hold the people of Linden hostage. Two, the intended motion on the PPPAC by the PPP is directly to stymie the scrutiny of the people's money under this regime. Three, it pretends that all is well at GCOM and that the comprehensive electoral reforms are not needed, despite calls from CARICOM Observer Mission, among others, for fresh registration from scratch. Four, the blatant padding of the voters list using the amended Registration of Births and Deaths Act. Five, to continue to Guyana policy towards the allocation of funds to NDCs and RDCs, whereby specifically opposition-led councils are discriminated against. Six, the continued land grabbing in Mocha, Belladrum, Ogo, Linden, and other parts and in other communities outside the PPP stronghold speaks volume. Seven, the unconstitutional appointment of the acting police commissioner, Mr. Clifton Hickins. Eight, the reluctance of the PPPC to implement relief measures to deal with the current rising of cost of living. All these are acts on others to demoralize the nation and sap the energies and faith of its people. Matters will get worse if the PPP continues to believe that its attempt at political domination should stand above the people's interests, and that which we as the party will stand resolute against. We raise these concerns with a sense of urgency to alert citizens that the nation is plunging headlong into a national crisis. If left unchecked, if left unchallenged, the PPPC will continue to assume that Guyana belongs to Freedom House by decree or birthright. If left unchecked and unchallenged, the country will face a crisis in governance that will bring needless harm at a time when the blessings of the oil wealth should be inspiring national optimism and rapid development. So the question is, what is the way forward? Clearly, to await good sense to infuse the PPP would be a waste of time. Instead, decent citizens, the private media, enlightened civil society organizations must continue to expose, resist, and revert the excesses of the PPPC, thereby protecting our country and ensuring it does not descend further into a crisis in democracy and governance. I thank you.
Thank you. So we will now open the floor for questions based on the statement. And as is customary, we'll ask the media personnel to show by the raise of hand and indicate your media house and your name. Mr. Adam Harris.
Good morning, this question is directed to Ms. Walton this year. Now, you said, I'm not familiar with the legislation that allows any and everybody to be registered as a Guyanese. Are you saying that if someone presents himself or herself to a JP or a two-show, if the two-show is corrupt, he can decide to grant a Guyanese birth certificate? Or are there checks and balances to ensure that whatever information you give to the JP or the two-show can be verified?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Harris. The way the law is currently constructed, there are no checks and balances. And this is why we are alarmed, and we continue to sound the alarm, and we're calling on Guyanese to be aware, because you are absolutely correct. If corrupt, for example, Justice of the Peace decides that he should, for a price, confer or make that declaration, that person becomes entitled to a birth certificate, and thereby is deemed to be a citizen of Guyana. So it is quite alarming, and there are no checks and balances. Neither are there very strenuous penalties to mitigate against nefarious conduct. So this is clearly a case where the PPPC administration has deliberately opened the floodgates to mischief. And as we pointed out, their hypocrisy in bemoaning the lack of integrity in the fraternity of the Justices of the Peace and Notaries Public, and then turning around and conferring on them the power to deem a person a citizen of Guyana.
Thank you.
Follow up.
Go ahead.
If so you're saying that if I should challenge someone who has a birth certificate by whatever means, the authorities have no way of verifying my challenge, like the deeds registrars, not the deeds, but the registrar can't verify my challenge. And you're saying that if my challenge proves to be accurate, then the penalty is minimal?
That is precisely what I'm saying, that we have no strict or stringent penalties in the legislation, and that there is no need, based on the current construct of the law, for the registrar of births and deaths to do any kind of verification. This is why it is alarming, and this is why we are bringing it, and we continue to bring it to the attention of the public.
Thank you. Any other questions? And if I may say, today we will be a bit, we'll be taking questions primarily on the speech, the press statement today. I see the hand of Mr. Lakeram.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Good morning. You can go ahead.
Lakeram Bagrat from the Starboard News. Ms. Walton Desir, you said that the legislation was amended with the aim of padding the voters list. Have your party on the ground encountered any such instance or any instance of someone who is not eligible for Guyanese citizenship? The migrants particularly that you would have referred to. Any such instance of them obtaining birth certificates under this new legislation? And if yes, how many such instances and where?
Well, I will want to confirm with you that we are indeed in receipt of complaints, particularly in the from the far-flung hinterland regions of persons having acquired Guyanese birth certificates. And we want to say this, that we are not surprised that generally people on the coast are having a very difficult time obtaining birth certificates. Some are waiting for 5, 6 months when a child is born to have that birth registered. We suspect that there is an emphasis being placed on registering births in the far-flung hinterland regions, and that is why there appears to be a paucity of birth certificates available to Guyanese out here on the coast. So yes, we are in receipt of several complaints. I cannot give you a definite number because this is a situation that is changing daily. Daily we get calls. If it's from Bartica, if it's from Region 1, Region 8, Region 9, that, you know, there are people who obviously are migrants who have suddenly gotten a Guyanese birth certificate. And we wish to make a point very, very clear. We are not speaking here of the children, for example, of Guyanese who would have migrated to Venezuela and because of the humanitarian crisis are returning home. We wish to make that very clearly because those persons, the children of those persons would, under our law, be legitimately entitled to Guyanese citizenship.
A follow-up. You said several instances, but to date, how can you give me a ballpark figure of how many such complaints, or how the amount of the complaints that you would have received from when this process has started to now, a ballpark figure, and what is your party doing apart from exposing it or making claims at this forum, but what is your party doing to ensure or to curb this problem?
Well, let me start with the issue of curbing, because when this law was passed in the National Assembly, we warned of the dangers. Unfortunately, the PPPC administration, being the administration that they are, did not see the points that we were making as being worthy of serious attention. And so we can only continue to sensitize you, the media, to sensitize the citizens of Guyana as to the dangers that are inherent in this issue. We have spoken to GCOM and we have indicated to them that we are in receipt of these complaints. And so that is another intervention that we have taken. But again, it comes back to the fact that such an inimical law was passed in the National Assembly using their one-seat majority. And it comes back to what Mr. Figueira said in his statement, that the PPPC administration continues to engage in a course of conduct that will cause Guyanese to have to react, because it is simply about domination and control and using their one-seat majority to achieve these very nefarious ends.
Thank you.
You didn't give me the ballpark figure, if you have that.
I have said to you that it is a situation that is evolving daily. And I'm sure that once we are ready, we will indicate, once we will have compiled that information, we will certainly be happy to share it with you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Mr. Adam Harris.
For Mr. Figueira. Mr. Figueira, you've been talking about the land grabbing in places like Mocha, Belledrum, and all of that. There was an incident involving Lincoln Lewis when he spoke of ancestral lands, and Anil Nandlal had told people that just go and take the land anyhow. At the same time, the very ANIL had been instituting legal action against people who acquired land for whatever reason, claiming that they were doing so illegal. Are there two laws? The people at Mocha, some of them have what they say transported land, and they might not have been using it and you're trying to grab it. Are you saying that these people do not have recourse to the courts if the government insists on taking those lands?
Well, we're saying that we are firm believers as a party that the law is paramount and there's equality with respect to the laws of Guyana. So our admonition to residents of Guyana who are facing these challenges is to utilize the courts. And it reaffirms our point, Mr. Adams, that there is indeed two Guyanas. And we have seen it being on display consistently with the very policies, so many different policies of the PPP administration. Different sectors of the community, of the society are being treated differently by this administration. And this whole concept of a one Guyana, we consider it a gimmick because in reality, it is not being reflected on the ground. For example, in Lindens, a lot of the lands in Linden were owned by NISIL. Under the coalition government, many Lindeners who were living on those lands for years, we would have taken a decision as an administration to regularize those lands and created agreements of sale of which people would have paid for those lands. And to date, people have been waiting for their final documents so that they could go and get access to loans from the banks and such like. But the government is taking a resistance in offering the final document to those residents. I'm talking about hundreds of Lindeners who would have legally purchased those lands and are still awaiting NISIL and this administration to provide them their legal documentation. And the court would have ruled on this issue already. The High Court would have ruled on this matter because the government had tried to take away lands from several other Guyanese individuals who would have procured lands under the coalition government. And the court would have ruled in their favor. So precedent has been set in the courts, and the High Court justice would have affirmed that the agreements were legitimate. So the people are still up in arms with regards to why the government is deliberately being slothful in ensuring that the final documents for those Lindeners and many other Guyanese are not being finalized by NISIL. And we in our community have indicated to those persons who have had those legitimate arrangements with the government to proceed in building on those lands because the land rightfully belongs to them. They have a legal document, the court would have already ruled on it, and our encouragement is to all those persons who have had those legal transactions to pursue building on their land and occupy it. And that's our position in that.
Thank you. Any other questions? Well, without any other hands being raised here, I will take it to mean the media has no further questions for the panel. And we would like to thank you once again for joining our press conference today. Do have a good afternoon.